Hi, I'm Katie Ziskind. I'm the owner of Wisdom Within Counseling and Coaching, where I help distant, disconnected couples shift into emotional connection and sexual intimacy. You can work with me by heading over to wisdomwithinct.com. That's wisdomwithinct.com. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how sexual trauma affects a female's sex drive and how this shows up in marriage conflicts. So a lot of couples will come to me. I am a Gottman Level 2 trained marriage specialist. I am also a certified sex therapy informed professional. This means that I give you a safe place to overcome religious trauma, sexual abuse, sexual molestation, this pain of these experiences in your life, and then also understand how they play a role in your current marriage dynamic. So I give couples a safe place to talk about sex and sexuality. A lot of couples come to me because they're fighting about sex. So you might think that sex is not frequent enough, or maybe you and your partner are stuck in a cycle where it seems like one of you has a high sex drive and one of you has a low sex drive. And there's this fight where one's saying, no, I don't want to have sex, and the other one wants to have sex. And that can be a very common pattern. We can have biological aspects to things. We can have emotional aspects, which we're going to talk about today, the trauma aspects, and there can be physical aspects to sex, right? There's a lot behind sexuality that we need to unpack. A lot of us grow up with shame around masturbation, misinformation from a strict conservative or religious upbringing around sex. There's a lot of fear that lives in the body around opening up sexually after sexual trauma or abuse of any kind, and that can leave a lingering impact for decades. So I wanted to talk a little bit about specifically female sex drive and sexual desire, and how this is impacted by past trauma. So first, let's define trauma. Trauma is anything that happens to you that wasn't your choice. So trauma is witnessing abuse, experiencing abuse. Sexual trauma doesn't have to be someone experiencing rape, incest, molestation, or unwanted touch. Sexual trauma can also be experiencing infidelity, having a partner that betrayed them. Sexual trauma can also be someone objectifying your body without you wanting that, right? Sexual trauma can also look like non-contact sexual abuse. So if you've shared a naked photo with someone or a nude picture, and then that was just for their eyes, and then they've shared it with your whole school or shared it with their friends, and now you feel humiliated and betrayed by them, that's a form of sexual abuse. Exposure can be a form of sexual abuse. So maybe you didn't experience touch that was unwanted or non-consensual, but someone showed you their naked body or forced you to, view something sexual in nature. Viewing pornography at a very young age is a form of non-contact sexual abuse. So just want us to think about trauma as being this umbrella. Sexual trauma impacts our sexual blueprint. Whether we want to recognize it or not, it does impact our sex drive. Even if the trauma happened 20, 30 years ago, it still impacts how we view sexual desire and how we view our own sexuality to this day. So sexual trauma can affect a female's sex drive more than you might realize, and in many different ways. The impact depends on the nature of the trauma, how long the trauma happened for, the memories of the trauma, and also, the person's emotional support system and the different types of trauma. So someone could have sexual trauma, and they may also have experienced narcissistic abuse from a parent, a father or mother, that adds to the pain of what they've experienced. And so in therapy, both couples therapy and individual therapy, we can gently, slowly, holistically, and in a very positive, self-care oriented, self-soothing way process the trauma. So first, we talk about sex in a healthy way, right? For a lot of people, saying the word sex out loud, feels dirty, it feels taboo, it feels like, it's sinful, right? Saying the word masturbation is, in many religious communities, unacceptable, right? It's a sin to do that. And so we have to really start to release that shame and push away that cloak of shame, guilt, and fear. So talking about sex is healthy and normal, and it's an organic thing that we all crave. For some women, sexual trauma can really decrease sex drive. It can, sexual trauma can make a woman feel adverse emotions around her own sexual urges. A lot of religious, conservative communities and cultures end up blaming women for sexual abuse. And so that self-blame and that cultural blame becomes self-blame, and it becomes internalized. And so a woman might completely disconnect from her sexual self and her sexuality due to these feelings of fear, anxiety, shame, and body disconnect. So part of counseling, couples counseling and marriage counseling, is actually looking at sexual empowerment and sexual embodiment and realizing it's okay to be a sexually embodied human. And what does that look like? And how does that feel safe? And how do we do that in a way that's supportive? Because when you've experienced sexual trauma, your brain has learned to be afraid of it. Like it's something that's going to lead to danger, right? Your body associates sexual activity with danger, with hazard lights, with triggering that fight, flight, and freeze response rather than desire and playfulness and openness and silliness and laughter, right? So if touch in your brain signals danger, it's going to be really hard to be vulnerable and playful and passionate with your partner, and that's normal. So we start to kind of work through and identify those things. And also, sexual trauma and as a result of sexual abuse can lead to sexual avoidance, a difficult time having a voice in the bedroom, this martyr syndrome or self-sacrifice syndrome. When you were sexually abused, your brain said, let's freeze, let's not talk, let's get through this experience and survive it. And so you did a good job surviving it, but now with your safe, trusted partner, it might be really hard to speak up and say, I don't like this, or I would like this different. And so we start to give you a voice in marriage counseling. So even if you feel like maybe you're being rushed, you might have that self-sacrificial voice say, oh, I just have to give. I just have to stay quiet. But it's okay to talk during sex. It's okay to pause. It's okay to fart. It's okay to need a break. It's okay for arousal to wax and wane. We go through all of these things that are really normal human experience elements. Like, we kind of talk about the myths and the misinformation the porn industry shows us, and how porn is not real life and porn is a fantasy. And so women who have decreased sex drive due to religious trauma can have a difficult time feeling aroused. It can take longer. Foreplay needs to be lengthened. And for a woman who hasn't experienced any sexual trauma, foreplay needs to be about 45 to 90 minutes. The male body or a penis owner only needs about 4 to 8 minutes of foreplay to reach peak sexual arousal, whereas the female body needs about 45 to 90 minutes. And then when you have past sexual trauma, that time is lengthened even more. So a lot of times when couples come in with a male partner who has a higher sex drive, understanding adequate foreplay is a key ingredient in understanding the female sex drive and the female orgasm. So lengthening foreplay, building out, slowing down, building arousal is really important when we look at overcoming decreased sexual desire based on sexual trauma experiences. And women may also experience pain during physical intimacy. There can be a physical pain response in the body because the nervous system is still in protective mode. So, we really need to talk about that and process that in a safe place together. So other times, we have women that experience decreased sexual desire and low sex drive and body disconnect. And on the other hand, we can also see hypersexual arousal. So almost like a compulsion around sex drive. So we have one female that has completely cut themselves off from sexuality, doesn't want to have sex, could live the rest of her life without having sex. And that's a trauma response. And then we have another female, due to sexual trauma and unwanted touch and exposure to sexual material, her sex drive is almost hyper high and very, very compulsive or impulsive. So sexual trauma can lead to an increase in sexual activity, an increase in promiscuous behaviors, and hypersexuality And this is also a coping or numbing strategy. So this is also a form of body disconnect and disassociation. So this is a form of fight, flight, and freeze as well. And in these cases, sexual behavior may be problematic, it may be very risky, and it's being used as an attempt to regain a sense of control, because trauma makes us feel helpless and powerless. And so there's an attempt to regain self-worth through sex or the physical act of sex, and an attempt for connection, but oftentimes this leaves a female feeling very numb, sad, lonely, and disconnected. And this is a really interesting aspect of things, because when sexual trauma leads to increased sexual activity in an impulsive or compulsive way, this is also disconnected from true intimacy, and there's a disconnection from emotional intimacy. So this is just as problematic, and it's common for women who've experienced sexual trauma to want validation externally, and to have a sense of low self-esteem and low self-worth from the trauma they've experienced, and maybe even the blame others have placed on them, and to be trying to kind of claw their way out of that experience, and to be using sexual activity as a way to receive validation for a short period of time. And so it's very normal for women who are stuck in a state of fight, flight, or freeze to kind of be hypersexual as well after sexual trauma. So we kind of see one extreme or the other. And healing can happen in trauma-informed therapy with myself or someone on my team at Wisdom Within Counseling, so that you can experience a sense of connection to yourself, right? Women who have this kind of hypersexuality development after sexual trauma may be in a state of chronic cheating or chronic affairs, and may not feel like they can stop, right? And that can be very damaging and hurtful. Infidelity can be very hurtful, and kind of seeking new relationship energy outside the marriage can be super hurtful, and actually can be rooted in unhealed and unresolved sexual trauma from childhood. So I would love to talk with you and your partner and help you both understand how sexual trauma and sexual abuse affects the brain, hormones, and the nervous system, and plays into your current marriage conflicts. I give you a safe place to talk about your sexuality, whether it's, from shifting from disconnection, where maybe you've never had a sexually safe or sexually embodied experience, and you've always wanted that, and you want to talk about it and figure out how to get there. And we can do that in the safe place of couples therapy. And maybe you've had a history where you've been sexually promiscuous or experienced an increase in sexual activity and want to break some numbing or negative coping behaviors related to sex. Maybe you identify as a sex addict or a pornography addict, or you feel this compulsion around sexual activity, and you want to kind of look at that and understand yourself more and develop some healthier, more positive coping mechanisms that actually are rooted in self-connection and connection to your partner. And so I would love to support you in giving you a sex positive space. We talk about what it was like to be raised in a conservative religious upbringing. We talk about how to overcome sexual shame, sexual guilt, and fear. We talk about what does it mean to be connected to your body and connected to your sexuality, and to ask for what you want, like live in the moment, in a real-time experience where you're naked and vulnerable with your partner. And how do we prepare for a sexual experience? What does foreplay look like? How does a beautiful sexual experience look when all we've been shown is porn and these fabricated fantasy experiences? How do we create a really beautiful real life experience, where we might be farting or crying or laughing or, fading in and out of arousal? And how do we support a safe, trauma-sensitive sexual experience and an ongoing frequency that your marriage feels fulfilled by, right? And so this isn't about performance. This isn't about muscling through or grinding your teeth or gritting your teeth through pain. This is about being your authentic self and finding, therapy and marriage therapy with me as a safe place to talk about sex and your sexuality, sexual desires, sexual expressions, understand sexual arousal, and really have a good grasp of the female sex drive so that your marriage can have, sexual intimacy as a beautiful outlet and a form of connection and a true deep sense of intimacy rather than this thing that's causing conflict or someone's feeling rejected and unwanted and lonely and it causes intense disconnection, right? So I would love to help you use your sexuality and really utilize your sexuality as a way to connect with your partner and build amazing intimacy in a loving long-term marriage. So I am a certified sex therapy informed professional. I'm a Gottman level 2 trained marriage specialist. I love talking about cycles of sexual avoidance and how to understand those and work through those in couples therapy. And I would love to support you and your partner in building a stronger marriage garden and a stronger couple bubble. So you can head over to wisdomwithinct.com. That's wisdomwithinct.com. I'm Katie Ziskind, and I hope you enjoyed this video.